Thank you for everyone who is joining us for this afternoon session right after lunch. My name is Stephanie Lumnitz. I have the pleasure to co-create this event together with Sergio, Peter, but also all of you. And today, this afternoon, I also have the pleasure to announce Lynn Dudenhofer, who is our second keynote speaker of the day. Lynn is a senior intelligence expert and a lead technical analyst with a background in law enforcement with the criminal police, and she is currently one of the leading global experts in the intelligence and security domain. So she has worked with many international organizations, including the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, the International Organization for Migration, or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And today, she will share with us her expertise and also her insights in combining open source intelligence and Earth observation data in the security domain, as well as give us an outlook on how AI is criminally misused. So warm welcome to Lynn Dudenhofer, please.
Well, very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. And I was clearly very motivated a few weeks ago when I compiled that title. So let's see what we can get through today. I'm definitely going to talk about combining OSINT, so open source intelligence, and Earth observation data a fair bit. And then I'm also going to talk about AI and how it's misused predominantly in transnational organized crime. And maybe what we can do about it as well. But, so I work predominantly at the intersection of exactly this problem, where we're dealing with criminal innovation that is outpacing law enforcement significantly. So while technology and advancing technological possibilities and opportunities also help in prevention and intercepting as well as detecting criminal activity, they also offer a great potential for exploitation. So that means that even though there is already a growing sector where there are interdisciplinary teams and where we have collaboration between the private and public sector in particular, our response to that is still somewhat fragmented, which weakens the impact that we could have. So my question, I guess, for the day is whether intelligence fusion or the fusion of intelligence methods can close that gap. And the answer to that is, I don't really know. We can try. But what I'm trying to work towards with, I guess, a group of motivated individuals is bridging the gap between traditional approaches in intelligence and in the security domain, as well as more innovative tech-enabled approaches. So in that domain, I have worked in the past few years significantly on mapping transnational organized crime across the digital and physical domains. And that means in intelligence, just to give a bit of background, specifically when it comes to open source intelligence, while we're trying to collect the digital breadcrumbs and we're trying to find and pinpoint someone's digital footprint, we're always, at our first opportunity, going to try to tie that person or that criminal organization or that network to the physical world. So that means we want to know where they were, what trafficking routes they use, what borders they crossed. We want to, if we have, so that's for transnational organized crime, but if we have a traditional person of interest investigation, for example, we want to know their check-ins, their locations, so on and so forth. So as soon as we can tie them to the physical domain, that's great, and that is where Earth observation technology as well as satellite imagery comes in very handy. And the technologies or the methods in Intel, so the intelligence techniques, usually go hand in hand. So I myself, when I was more junior, held the title of OSINT analyst, so open source intelligence analyst. And I find that somewhat misleading because OSINT is but an intel method, and it should usually, it's not a profession, and it should be used hand in hand with other intel methods, such as, for example, geospatial intelligence. And usually there is a significant overlap between these methods, and we have here open source intelligence, we have obviously geospatial intelligence, we have human intelligence, which is more commonly known in law enforcement, but even when you're investigating online, so when you're using OSINT as a method, and you have, for example, journalists with boots on the ground, you can get human, so human intelligence from their end, which is usually quite helpful. And then we have measurements and signature intelligence as well as signals intelligence, and those two are more commonly used, obviously, in the Earth observation domain as well as in the military domain. Now, I myself predominantly work across the intel methods of GeoInt and OSINT, a little bit of human, but not so much. And therein, I specialize in this particular facet or element of transnational organized crime. And I'm not sure if you're quite aware, so I'm going to walk you through that real quick, but in Southeast Asia and East Asia, that's where we first saw it. We a few years, we recognized that there's a significant transnational organized crime nexus that traffics individuals into so-called cyber scam centers in so-called special economic zones that are hard to reach for local law enforcement and even government. And in these, or at these fortified sites, most of these trafficked individuals are forced to work, let's say, at least 16 hours per day, and they're forced to scam others online. And they're lured into these cyber scam centers predominantly via fraudulent job ads or fake job ads that are posted on social media platforms such as Facebook and predominantly Telegram. So we have these victims, and there are thousands, who are currently stuck in these cyber scam centers, and they can't leave. Their documents have been confiscated, and they're held against their will. I'm not saying all of them are there against their will, but most of them are. And they have the dual role of being a victim and a perpetrator at the same time, right? So they're trafficked, they cannot leave, they face violence as well as sexual violence if they don't perform, they're sold into prostitution if they don't perform, and then they are also perpetrators because they're forced to scam others online. And the scale of that by now is quite significant insofar as that these cyber scam centers are not confined to that particular region anymore. Now we're already seeing that same model rolled out to other continents. So we have quite a significant convergence there of transnational organized crime, where we have the element of human trafficking, cyber crime, obviously graphic violence, then labor trafficking, sex trafficking, money laundering, predominantly in underground casinos, and the infrastructure of these cyber scam centers is growing. So, the visualization you're looking at here is one that was recently released by Interpol. They are investigating exactly the same thing and mapping cyber scam centers, and they're also collecting data on the development of those fraudulent job ads that I mentioned. And what we're seeing is a significant increase in the sophistication of these criminal operations. So that means that reflected in the job ads, we can see that back, well, a few years ago, the jobs that were advertised in those fraudulent job ads were predominantly call center jobs. You needed maybe some English language skills, and that was it, right? Now, we're seeing job ads that require IT skills, that require cryptocurrency negotiation skills, so quite advanced, as well as models, and they're with a particular detail that European-looking models are preferred, and those are obviously for the scam or cyber-enabled fraud video calls, right? To evoke a bit more trust. So we have an expanding global footprint of this type of crime, is what I'm saying. Now, I've been fortunate enough to work in projects and international research projects that combined Earth observation technology as well as open source intelligence for mapping exactly this type of crime, amongst other types of criminal activity. But this particular one, namely called Earth Observation for Security, tackled environmental crimes as well as illegal trafficking. And the latter part relates to human trafficking, obviously, which related to the cyber-enabled fraud component within these cyber scam centers. So what we did is we monitored the criminal activity in special economic zones in the Mekong region, and we used OSINT, so open source intelligence, to monitor and analyze events, locations, as well as mentions of multilingual keywords that were predominantly related to either cyber-enabled fraud or suspected drug labs and drug production and synthetic precursors thereof. Now, the Earth observation part then for this particular component focused predominantly on high resolution and very high resolution imagery of either those sites of the suspected drug labs or the expanding infrastructure in a time series of the cyber scam centers, as well as new suspected cyber scam centers that were popping up. So you can see how these two intel methods that I mentioned before, namely OSINT and GeoINT, work together quite nicely. So just to give you a bit of an idea how significant this problem really is, we can see here an image from 2019 in June, of the site where today we have KK Park, one of the most notorious and most, I guess, well-known cyber scam centers in Myanmar, right at the border. So you can see there's not much there. And then in June 2024, we have the same location, and you can see all of the infrastructure that popped up. And this is now even still outdated, right? So we have more pictures thereof, and the infrastructure is growing, and this is only one of the most well-known cyber scam centers. It is therefore also quite well monitored, although unreachable. But then we also have a lot of makeshift cyber scam centers that are kind of popping up all over the region. Now, one of the reasons why this is happening is, for example, the proliferation of Starlink equipment to more remote regions. So Thailand, for example, cut off in an effort to kind of dampen or slow down the development of cyber scam centers in Myanmar. Thailand cut off a lot of the internet connection and telecom connections for Myanmar that went across the border, which only led in turn to a proliferation of Starlink equipment for more remote internet access in Myanmar. So it did not stop these criminal networks or syndicates at all, unfortunately. Now, what we did on the OSINT side of things is we collected data predominantly from Telegram, that was related to the region. We were fortunate enough to attribute it to the region, at least with soft attribution in most cases. But then also relevant for job ads, relevant for fraudulent job ads, relevant for, ransom requests to relatives, relevant for relatives, messages of relatives looking for, their family that had been trafficked, and so on and so forth. Now, we were faced with a significant challenge, namely that we had, over a certain period of time, collected 800K Telegram messages, which were all relevant in some sort of context. And for even a very talented team of analysts, that was impossible to go through in that amount of time and analyze. So our solution to that was to utilize, at least for the initial quantitative assessment, a large language model enabled retrieval augmented generation mechanism. So while RAG obviously is nothing new, the way we used it, I guess, for Intel purposes was relatively new and very helpful as well, because it helped us sift through a rather large vector database in order to assess what locations had been mentioned, what kind of keywords had been mentioned, in which language they had been mentioned, what kind of crime types had been mentioned, and so on and so forth. just very briefly, this is what that looked like in a very simplified, high-level way. So we collected multilingual Telegram data, which was predominantly, I must say, in Chinese. We processed and stored that data, and then we were able to query and filter it. And we ran the large language model and RAG analysis, but at the same time, you can see that we also ran an aggregate data analysis, just to understand a bit better, the development of the data over time. And after prompting the large language model-enabled RAG mechanism that we were using with a bit of a graphic user interface, the analysts, or my Intel team, was then able to run a qualitative analysis and dive down into those pieces of data that were picked as relevant a bit more in depth. So this kind of ties in nicely with one of my main points about the fact that we need to increase collaboration between the public and the private sector, because the end user of this project was an international organization which collaborated with local law enforcement. So this, the outcome hereof were obviously 4 monitoring cycles, 4 reports and analyses, as well as shapefiles and KML files that were all handed over to this international organization by these companies. And if I can just briefly touch upon the topic of the human in the loop, because part of this analysis process was obviously semi-automated, and the human in the loop, particularly when it comes to Intel analysis, at this point in time cannot be replaced, because this evidence or intel has to, at some stage, potentially hold up in court. Now, with AI-generated, let's call it intel, because I don't want to call it evidence yet. With AI-generated intel, that's not yet possible. But back in the day, open source intelligence-based evidence was also not accepted in court proceedings. By now, if it's presented in a standardized and transparent way, it is accepted in some court proceedings, even in the European Union, right? Particularly when it comes to mapping or monitoring war crimes. Now, and the reason why I'm talking about this, particularly when it comes to this slide, is because what I did here is I had a smaller data set. It was still relatively large, too large for me to go through it qualitatively. So I wrote a bit of a script that looped through my JSON files and then gave me the 50 most used words in a word cloud. You can see how that data set was in Chinese, and then I had it machine translated, and I got the result on the right-hand side. So my data set was about fraudulent job ads. You can see how most of these words make sense, right? We have a base salary being mentioned, we have a trial period mentioned, we have an airplane being mentioned, which is a bit of a hint of how these people are being transported or trafficked at this point in time, which is obviously relevant, so that's something I dove in a bit deeper. But then we also have one particular word, well, a couple of words, but one that stands out, which does make sense, which is color powder or colored powder. Those are synonyms. And if I had not known the code language that was used by these criminal networks, I wouldn't have known what I was looking at. I would have probably assumed that the machine translation was way off track, and I would have double-checked, and I would have probably lost my mind at some stage, because at this point in time last year, when I was investigating this, it was not common knowledge, so it wasn't something that you could find on the internet. But I knew that colored powder or color powder stands for sexual services, prostitution, and sexual exploitation. So obviously, that kind of element was being offered, sold, or acquired or requested online. I didn't know the exact context, but I knew that this was in terms of the context of job ads, so maybe people were requesting it. So that gave me an idea of where I had to look, right? And what kind of keyword I had to query in my data set. So therefore, and that's the point I'm trying to make, the human in the loop, because of the subject matter expertise that analysts bring, is obviously very important, particularly when it comes to intel, and particularly when evidence has to hold up in court. Now, unfortunately, criminal syndicates can also use AI, and they are absolutely doing that. And because they don't have rules or regulations when it comes to that, they're also doing it a little bit faster, right? And they're also scaling a little bit faster. So just to give you a little bit of an overview when it comes to AI in transnational organized crime, especially when it comes to trafficking in human beings, we're seeing some more recent trends, such as that AI is supporting scripting and social engineering of potential victims, so that the human intervention actually takes place at a later point in that communication with the victim. And part of it is semi-automated at first. We're seeing automated scam workflows that are being just executed on a regular basis. And then obviously machine translation, live machine translation in chats, fair enough. That's not really something new, but what that eradicates are the usual red flags that we used to watch out for when it comes to scams, right? Such as false vocabulary, wrong words being used, wrong synonyms being used, spelling mistakes, all these kind of things. All these red flags don't exist anymore. And then one of the more concerning trends relates to deepfakes, for example, for the purpose of KYC bypass, so Know Your Customer bypass. Know Your Customer is a security measure introduced by banking apps. And these deepfake software suites that are actually being advertised on Telegram in the region as well, claim that they only need one front-facing photo, such as the one on the right-hand side, to perform a live AI face swap. So that means on a video call, right? That means exactly for the purpose of Know Your Customer bypass when it comes to banking apps. Now, and I just want to show you a couple of videos. Those are these advertising videos that I was talking about, and you can see how not only is there a lot of branding, so these are established brands that are advertising to cyber scam centers in particular, not exclusively, but also, but you can see how these models that are advertising the software, they're performing certain moves, such as they touch their face, they put their hair to the front, and all these kind of techniques are shown to advertise that the software has improved so much that it doesn't even glitch anymore when you touch your face, because it used to. Now, some of it, like this, for example, doesn't look quite real yet, but it'll, this is only the development that took place in the past couple of years. So you can imagine what this will look like in a couple of years. So that is definitely one of the more concerning trends we're seeing, because this can also take place live, and it is being advertised particularly to large-scale IT companies in the region that require this type of software, and those are really only the cyber scam centers that would use this for obviously criminal and illicit purposes. Another emerging risk that we are dealing with relates to jailbroken large language models. Obviously, we used to be able to jailbreak large language models via prompting. This is not really the case anymore, but if you're technologically advanced enough, you can download open source models, jailbreak the source code, and I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, yeah, but not everyone has those technological skills. That's fair enough. But they're selling them. And they're selling them online, for example, on social media platforms like Telegram. So not even on the dark web anymore. It's not necessary. Telegram is way more user-friendly. You can reach a broader audience right then and there. And that means that you can advertise it openly, relatively openly, on channels that people can just subscribe to. And then for the more direct sales funnel, you move to direct messaging. And then the transaction obviously takes place via crypto. So you can see how that's a problem, because when the large language model is jailbroken and the safety mechanisms and rules and regulations and railguards are removed, then you essentially have a perfect partner in crime that will do about anything, write about any malicious code, and tell you how to cook up drugs and whatnot. So in terms of a bit of an outlook, when it comes to generative AI and transnational organized crime, in my opinion, this is what we are already looking at on the left-hand side, point 1, and then a few more points that we're going to look at in the really near future. So we're obviously seeing some synthetic media creation, such as deepfakes. We're seeing a more widespread generative AI adoption, as well as adversarial machine learning advances. Now, number two, the fraud deployment. I've already mentioned most of those points, so I'm not going to read them out. But number three is interesting, because what we're seeing already and what we're going to see more of is a crime as a service model. So that means that, for example, those deepfake software suites that I showed you, they are not a one-off sale, right? They have a 24/7 customer service. They have regular bug fixes that are being released, right? So they actually want customer intimacy. They want to take care of their customers. Who are their customers? For example, cyber scam centers. And then we have the significant scaling dynamics, where we have a lower barrier to entry for more technologically sophisticated crime, because of, for example, jailbroken large language models. We have the potential of automation of fraud operations, if you're thinking multi-stage agents, and so on and so forth. So I'm not trying to scare anyone, I'm just trying to say that this is what we're going to deal with in the next few years, and it's something that we need to be aware of. And where, for example, Earth observation comes in really handy in combination with open source intelligence is if we denoise all of the data that we find online in terms of, for example, on Telegram. And I denoise it, for example, through the LLM-enabled RAG mechanism, which definitely can be improved. It was just something that I ran at the time. And I find certain points to qualitatively look at. And for example, they contain locations. Maybe they contain images that I can geolocate. And then I can pinpoint a satellite on that. And I can look at, the time series and the development over time. And I can see how fast the cyber scam center is scaling, whether they're using Starlink equipment dishes on the roof, whether they're already using solar power panels as well, which is another equipment trend that we've been seeing. So when I combine these two methods, these two intel methods, or these two data points together, it's actually quite a powerful tool in a workflow, where one intel method can be used to verify the other, and you get a more comprehensive intel picture. And that is exactly the intersection that I've been working at for the past few years. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I kind of said we had a problem. So I don't really have the solution, not that wise, but I have been doing a few things to kind of try and alleviate the problem a little bit, at least a little bit. So obviously, we need to focus on technological innovation and also ethical adoption of new technologies, which, fair enough, that latter part is going to slow us down a little bit as opposed to criminal syndicates, but we're not criminal syndicates, so we need to work with certain AI policies as well as obviously GDPR and so on and so forth. But then my main point, where I've also made the most positive experience in terms of impact, relates to public and private sector partnerships as well as interdisciplinary teams. So I've built a few Intel teams in my life, and you don't want 8 of the same analysts, right, with the same skill sets. You are dealing with interdisciplinary challenges, and that means you want to have an interdisciplinary team. Now, on the left-hand side, where you can see me point at various screens, that is an initiative that I have worked on together with Regional Support Office for the Bali process, and this was funded by the UK International Development, where we rolled out several intelligence trainings, particularly focusing on cyber scam centers and the interception of human trafficking, to Southeast Asia, and particularly to Southeast Asian and East Asian law enforcement, so specialized units that were working at this intersection of this crime nexus and had to obviously not have all of the technical skills themselves, but they had to be made aware, right? Because if you're a law enforcement officer and you don't even know what you're looking at when you see it online, that's a problem. So I think I have made my main points. They're right there. And I think also this is where I lost my will to live and I stopped designing slides, so please find me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, I think we have about 1 minute and 21 seconds left. So.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Indeed, we have time for one question only, so somebody has a question. Here we go.
Thanks for the great talk, Lynn. That was really fascinating. I'm from Decision Labs, a Berlin-based company. We just wrapped up a project with the European Space Agency looking at deep fakes in satellites data, and I'd love to talk more about that. But during a lot of the conflict that we're seeing, are you starting to also see the effects of deepfakes in or manipulated satellite imagery? And is that also on your radar?
Deepfakes in satellite imagery? Yeah, I mean, so far I've mainly seen cheap fakes. So actually, cheap fakes as opposed to deepfakes are just satellite images that are taken out of context, or any images, not satellite, right, necessarily, but any image that is taken out of context and portrayed as something else, a different context. Like, for example, from one conflict zone, you take a satellite image and you say it's from another conflict zone. That's what we consider a cheap fake. But deep fakes, in terms of satellite imagery, I think I've encountered only a few cases so far, but I have encountered them. So I think, you know, there is a platform that is called, and it's been around for a while, so that's actually not new. It's called, this X does not exist. And it's been around for a while, but obviously these kind of fake images or fraudulent images that were generated as a game or for fun back in the day, they never used to be as good. But they had different categories on that website, and now you can even generate street views that are not correct, or faked, right, or fraudulent. So the same, it also has a section for satellite images that are not real, and maybe those are not quite convincing because that was originally like a fun project, I think. And so no criminal intent whatsoever. But I can see how that would be not only a very interesting project that you're working on or will be working on, but also a significant challenge that we'll be dealing with more and more in the future. Thank you. Very good question.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn, again for these inspiring insights and also quite like interesting but scary insights maybe as well.